trying to figure us out.
Hello. How you doing? That was loud. Welcome. Here we are to greet the spring and live together in the time lapse of bulbs waking up through the ground, feeling their way around the dead leaves, the bits of bark, the spent wicks from New Year's firecrackers that hid beneath the snow with frozen holly berries, and all the other remembrances of winter that, if my daughter ever naps, I will rake with my hands into a wheelbarrow, schlep across the swollen lawn, and dump into the compost heap to rot and feed next year's children of this year's flowers. You feel how new we all are? How limber? Like my friend who, after drinking too much of my whiskey, climbs out of the downstairs window of my house so not to disturb those gypsy wrens who built their nest in the Valentine's wreath on my front door. The ones will now leave up through June, until they can properly say goodbye to their children, downsize to the waterfront creek, and reminisce about how the sunlight broke each morning over the birch in the front yard, peppering light through its flaky branches onto the home where their babies learned to fly. But before that flight turned their downy brown bodies into smooth brown specks, coasting further and further away, this is supposed to be loud. A flourish from that half-dead daylily I bought from a roadside stand, who pops her head out first each year now, calling to those all still sleeping to wake up! It is time to billow, to flabbergast, to stun and awe all those still sleeping from winter and pale from the interior who have forgotten how fucking beautiful it is to be alive right now. Let's get naked. Go down to the river, baptize our bodies in a church of fresh dirt, and watch as the tiny hairs on our sun-sick limbs stand at attention like the empty flagpoles of undiscovered countries, basking in the freedom of knowing no king. Blossom, friends. This is the time for it. All of these budding out trees are spitting oxygen for nobody else but you. You beautiful star-dusted happenstance of a dream. Hello. Good morrow. Welcome. All right, so this is a little thing that I like to do. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all very much for coming. It's weird to be talking about spring and planting in on the first day of fall. I guess it's also weird to be promoting a book called Please Plant This Book That You Can't Plant Anymore, because it's a real book instead of seeds now, so fuck it. So I like to start readings with this poem because it kind of helps us all get to like baseline of where we need to be. So can you guys help me with something? So years ago when I used to go to church, we would do this thing where like they would talk, and at some point somebody like up there would raise their hand and we had to say something. So like they would tell you before like going into it, all right, we're gonna say a bunch of stuff, and then whenever we go like this, you have to say a thing. And so like you would have to like remember the thing. And then when they said it, you would have to say the thing. So if I go like this, could you guys say amen for me? I'm not signing you up for any like weird shit, I promise. Can we practice real fast? Just to make sure that you remember how to do it? I swear to God, this is the only thing that we're going to do where you have to say anything. All right, so just pretend that I said like a bunch of stuff and then went,
amen.
Okay. I'd like it if it was way louder than that, but that was good to start. So this is called Ground Rules. And it's a poem that comes from the first book that Scott and I did together. And basically, I'd written a really sad book, and I wanted to stop writing sad poems. And this was kind of the poem where I said, I'm not going to write sad stuff anymore. I'm going to like declare my freedom from the sad things. And instead of doing that, I just wrote about all the sad things again. But so we'll pretend. So this is called Ground Rules. There will be no talk of politics or organized religion, no talk of wars or weapons or medicines and funding or the budget or the deficit or the fleeting idea of the dream. There will be no discussion of parties or agendas or the past and the future or forever and ever.
Amen.
There will be no thought of cancer or aneurysms bursting, no thought of functions ceasing or the decreasing will to live. There will be no I, there will be no you, there will be no us, there will be no them. There will only be the leaves falling softly into the creek bed and the knowing that we are only here right now. This is called Across the Synaptic Gap. I needed to hear myself. So I sat with memory and listened. I whispered songs you taught me, little hymns my muscles remembered. I fell out of myself so you could fall back into me. I did this in remembrance and forgot myself in my remembering. Okay, so this next poem is the first poem that came out in Please Plant This Book. It's called Tomato. And it goes along with a really cool variety of tomatoes called the Cherokee Purple. So I'm going to read that, and then I'm going to read a poem that this kind of grew out of. No pun intended, I said. So the poem that this comes from is called Meditations in Vegetable Gardens. And it's a poem of my granddad. And I'm going to read these all at one time, so I don't have to keep talking. But so my granddad had this little garden in his backyard, and he would police it heavily with a pellet gun and a Yingling light, and he would sit there in a lawn chair and he would shoot anything that went near any of his stuff. And so I remember specifically a stain on his patio where when he was sitting there one day, a mouse had run up to his foot and he just stomped it. So this has a Scott connection to it, oddly enough. Scott was, when we first started talking about this poem, he told me about how a night where he had walked through his apartment in Glasgow and it was dark, he was like going to the refrigerator or whatever, and he stepped barefoot on a mouse and half crushed it, and it didn't die. He said, I didn't know what to do, so he scooped it up and he put it in a pizza box and he just like finished it off because he was trying to be humane. And so he's like, I know that feeling, I did that, I killed a mouse like that. And so he drew this really beautiful, terrifying, this is the first illustration he gave me for If and When We Wake, this mouse skeleton with these like really theater-esque, like crying, laughing incisor teeth. It was really beautiful. It was the first drawing I got, and I remember like not knowing what I was going to get and seeing it and being like, holy shit. So I'm going to read the first poem from Please Plant This Book, which is called Tomato, and then Rich run that right into Meditation in Vegetable Gardens. The Cherokee Purples are peeking through their vestments like swollen Irish priests hiding whiskey in confessionals. Their branches stretch up toward the light, almost like they're praying, or dancing some native dance for life. I remember watching you thumb rat poison into cherry tomatoes, hiding them between the dark moss of the rail ties surrounding your humility garden. I want to breathe in the dirt. I want to remember your shoes. I was knee-high and sunburnt, learning how to plant leeks and trim dead blooms. You crushed a mouse beneath your foot. Its small bones resonated from the concrete slab as I scanned the dirt for seedlings. I liked my perception when I was young. Grass could whisper, and trees got stoned on sunlight, and people never left for good. Now I dip pot in embalming fluid and scatter salt like ashes in your vegetable garden. Knowledge is such shit. This is another Please Plant This Book poem. It's called Tokyo Long White Onion. I didn't know the seed varieties that I was going to get. When they sent them to me, we kind of like talked about what we could use. And so Baker Creek kind of picked them for me. And so Tokyo Long White Onion was a fun one because Richard Brautigan wrote a book called June 30th, which he wrote entirely in Japan. And so I was able to I'll harness that when I write these poems. So this is called Tokyo Long White Onion. Waking from dreams of the end of June for a morning walk through a frostbit garden, things feel alive again today. April's mud sucking at my boots and the still bare branches swaying above me like the mist over Japan. Silent and so old. Okay, this is a poem. So this is about, I hate to say it, this is a poem about religion, but this is a poem about religion. I have a daughter now, and I remember before she was even born thinking, like, I'm going to be faced with this little thing that doesn't know anything, that's asking me questions that I can't answer. And if I don't know if you remember being little and like you heard about heaven, and I wondered, like, what is this kid going to do when you walk up? They walk up to you and say, like, hey, where's heaven? And all you probably ever got is, I don't know, up. It's up. But like, I mean, they're sending people to Mars in a couple of years to just live there, and they haven't bumped into it yet. And so that makes like that question harder to answer the further and further out we go. So I wrote a poem pretending that God was one of those like old like John Wayne style like bandits, because that's kind of like how I think about it now. I'm also really obsessed with space, but in like the idiot's way of being obsessed with space. Like I can't tell you anything about space, but when you tell me something about space, I just go, whoa, it's fucking awesome. So it like scares me, it's terrifying, but I love it. And so there's a couple poems that I'm gonna read tonight that are like space related without knowing anything about space. This is called The Parts of Space We've Not Yet Seen. God is on the run, feeling around with his hands in the darkness of space, wishing he'd made just a bit more light on day one. It doesn't carry like he'd hoped it would. We're closing in, and so he's packing up and retreating like spaghetti western bandits, breaking down camp and moving deeper into the mountains. Nothing left behind but empty cans of beans, butts of hand-rolled cigarettes, and the embers of a burned-out paradise. We're more ruthless than he'd figured, and we're hell-bent on finding heaven on our own terms before we're taken against our will. People used to pray. Used to pick up trash outside inner-city schools and drop change in cans for Vietnam vets, and that's all it took. That was enough. But now we're getting restless and launching rockets and satellites and closing in on the world like Columbus, wide-eyed and dangerous, and I'll be goddamned if he doesn't feel like the Indian. You have to feel sorry for him. Up there looking over his shoulder, ducking behind theories we haven't cracked yet, hoping he can outlast us. It's the waiting that has to get to him. And even God must get scared up there in all that darkness. There's another poem about religion, kind of. This is called Burlicum Carrot. Do you guys know what carrots are good for? Like, as people to eat them? What they do for you?
Vision.
Yeah, good. Eyes. That's all you need. In speaking of religion, let us believe in our gardens. Dirty cedar churches built on cold mornings by quiet conjurers who still remember magic, like growing food from seed or seeing in the dark. All right, so this is another like kind of space-related poem. I wrote this right after David Bowie died. I like to steal like little bits of dialogue that I like catch from I'm an English teacher, and I like to steal little bits that I catch from my students. And I had a kid named Tim who told me about when he was little, he hated the fact that the moon followed him around, and so he would like curse at it and try and get it to leave him alone. And so when he told this story in class, I was like, yeah, I'm absolutely stealing that, Tim. And so he allowed me to take this little bit of dialogue. I promise you'll know which part is his. And so this is called Stardust to Stardust, or Ancestry. Onion grass trimmings and 2-cycle exhaust fumes smell like an August night so clear that space looks back down at us like proud parents at elementary school recitals. 6-year-old Tim snaps side-eyed over his shoulder, "Don't follow me, you fucking moon!" He wants to do this on his own. And either way, we'll all have to. So this next set is a little bit of a series from If and When We Wake. And I was lucky enough to study poetry from Arcadia, and so they sent me to Scotland to write for a little while. And it was my first time overseas, and I was terrified to be there, and I didn't know what I was doing. And so I got there a day early because my flight got messed up. And I just kind of sat in a park and I wrote all day because I didn't know what to do. I like kind of wanted to come home. And so I wrote these poems in a different order than I am going to read them to you, and a different order that they came out in the book, because the order in which they originally were written made me look like a psycho. Because like the poem that's called Homesick was written on day 1. It's now I think day 5, so I like had to change that. But now that we're all here, you know that like it was day 1. So it's broken into like different days, and the last day's title comes from an absurd play by Eugene Ionesco called Ball Soprano. You don't really need to know that, but I just like to give him credit for helping me write this. So this is called On Traveling Abroad. Day 1, transatlantic transfers. Sitting in an airport terminal, a graying couple settles beside me with locked fingers and brittle conversation. There are graying chairs and tattered carpets, and I am bound for Scotland, reading Kerouac, and my wife is home waiting for the red to blush through our tomato plants on this tiny day in a giant July. Day 2, walking along the North Sea. Coal burning through chimney pots, spitting dust over the North Sea. The taste is romantic, like faith, now, for tourism. Day 5, the pieces I can carry. A loose strand of hair doesn't have a smell. It doesn't have a taste, or a memory, or a set of eyes to gaze back at me and speak. I found a strand of her hair in my suitcase next to some postcards and a universal adapter. It really isn't her, but I wrap it around my finger like twine as if I'd otherwise forget. Day 8, homesick, or Ionesco's travel diary. I'm sitting in a Scottish park on a Scottish bench, drinking a bottle of Scottish water, listening to the Scottish birds chirping in their Scottish brogues and rolling their Scottish syllables. A Scottish lawnmower passes behind me, and the exhaust smells like a warm American backyard day with German sausages on a Japanese grill. I drag it into my lungs, but the taste is 5 hours off. Okay, so this next one, I don't normally read this one. But I was going through some stuff after Scott passed away, and I remembered that this was the poem that he said was his favorite poem that was in the book. So I was like, all right, I have to read it. He drew a really cool picture. So I was it's funny, they're here tonight, my cousins are here, and their son had a birthday party in a Delaware park, and I had to pee, and so I walked into the bathroom, and I saw this like horrible scene of this like just, it wasn't that horrible, I mean in the scale of horrible things, it was a dead moth in a spider web. And I remember thinking like, oh shit, that poor guy. And so I wrote a poem about it, and Scott drew this like giant Las Vegas looking sign with an arrow pointing, and it said, such a fucked way to go, and fucked was huge in like block letters. You probably saw it up there a little while ago. So this is called Obituary for a Gypsy. In a public bathroom in a Delaware state park, 2 moths huddle in a corner above a sink. One is dead. Trapped in a spiderweb, it hangs, an inanimate, powdery specter. The other pounds its silent lament against the wall. Such a fucked way to go. Okay, so these next 2, this is a hard summer. A lot of you Frightened Rabbit people that are here, you get it. It was a hard summer. And it kind of bookended itself a couple weeks ago. My grandmother passed away as well. So there's, I'm going to read 2 in a row here that kind of focus on that. The first one is called Lungs, and so right after Please Plant This book came out, Scott and I kind of went back and forth, and I had wanted to ask him if he wanted to do another full-length collection, but I kind of didn't have the balls. And he texted me, kind of like, I sent him like a picture of the cover or whatever, and it was like a congratulations text. And he's like, this sets us up really well for another book if you're up for it. And I was so happy. And I remember writing this poem and calling it Lungs and thinking, he's gonna eat this up. Like, the dude that loves to draw organs is gonna like eat up a poem called Lungs. My wife signed me up for an app when she was pregnant that would send me emails and tell me like where in the state of growth our in utero daughter was. And so like one day it would say like your daughter is like the size of a string bean and it has a face now. And like the next week it would say she has ears, but they're nowhere near where they're supposed to be. And then like over a couple of weeks, we like saw the migration of the ears down the sides of her face to become like a human head. And it was kind of cool. And I remember the lung development one was an email that said like, your daughter is breathing, but she's like not really breathing. She's like inhaling amniotic fluid and then just exhaling. And it's all just like making sure that the lungs are working properly. And it was that same week that my grandmother, I forget exactly what it was. She either like went on oxygen or like something happened with her oxygen. There was like an issue with the oxygen. I remember thinking like this was like a weird correlation. And so this poem is called Lungs. 9 weeks in, and this gray-black fuzzy picture of my daughter is now breathing, sort of. The ultrasound technician calls it practice. Movement to build memory so it'll be natural on the outside. 2 miles away, my grandmother's nurse reminds her how it works. Smelling the roses, blow out the candles. Outside, autumn's harvest bolts in the heat while the goldenrod topples, grown too tall for its old ambition. So this is a poem that I just wrote. I actually don't even think it's done, but I kind of wanted to do it anyway because I thought it was weird. Before she passed away, we were at her assisted living, and there was this like guy down the hall from her that every night put on a full suit and laid in. Like he was one of the guys that lived there, and he was done. And so every night he put on a suit and laid in bed on top of his sheets like this, like just I guess waiting. And I thought that was the weirdest thing, and I didn't hear about this. Like I was there all the time, and this was the one time that they were like, oh, by the way, you should go like 2 rooms down. You should go get a look at that guy. He fucking lays in his bed at night in his 3-piece suit, like hoping that he dies, and they can just bury him like that. And so this is one of those like I'm writing about the thing that I'm like writing around the thing that I don't want to talk about. So this is called The Man Down the Hall from My Grandmother Sleeps in His Funeral Suit. On top of the sheets, no less. His final act of aggression, fuck off to the hospice aides and the medicines and the gravity working so hard to hold him here. Dressed to the nines, he lies straight as an arrow, stiff as a board, coffin composed, door wide open for the world to see, or maybe not the world, but whatever he hopes comes next. My grandma whispers, the prettiest flowers get picked first. This is only his most recent bit of rebellion, as upturning trays of food and pocketing pills to cheek then flush just left him hungry and swollen, but here still, trapped. And growing impatient now, he's leaning more on symbolism than science, hope than fate. And so tonight again, after his daughter gives him the pajama talk, and after I kiss my grandmother's paper-thin cheek for what I'll later find out is the last time, he'll shimmy back out of his sweats, don his black best, make his bed and hop on top and wait for the darkness, or the light, or just anything other than this. This is a poem called Sartre in My Nursery. I'm really interested in existentialism, which, yes, is the shittiest thing that you can hear someone say that, like, you're now kind of forced to listen to. Oh, fuck, I hope this is fast. So I'm not going to go into it too deep, except that existentialism is the belief that none of this means anything and we're just kind of floating here randomly because molecules work their way into you. So I was thinking about all this while I was painting my daughter's nursery before she was born. So this is called Sartre in My Nursery. Rolling a second coat of paint on the walls in my daughter's bedroom, I hear April filling up the creek beneath our windows. I hope she learns how beautiful this all is, long before the fear of disappearing like raindrops into rivers. This is called Detroit Dark Red Beat. I find there's comfort in remembering the parts of life I've lost as thin seedlings, plucked for no other reason but to make room for hope to fill the empty spaces. All right, so this next one is another bit of like stolen material. So I walked into the hallway a couple years ago at school, and I walked file just in behind these 2 kids that were having like a little argument. I didn't hear the beginning or the end, I just heard this. The kid looked at the kid next to me and said, "You dumbass, humans can't emit light." And then just like they turned and walked away. And so I thought to myself like, yeah, you are a dumbass. People can emit light, come on, you're in high school. you should at least know this. But I started thinking, like, if we could emit light, what would make us emit light? What would be the thing that would, like, make us glow? And so I played around with that a little bit, and this kind of turned into, like, one of the very few love poems that I've ever written. Just because, I don't know, I like to write about things that I don't understand and try and help myself get to the other side, and I don't really feel like I need to do that too much with love. It's kind of like that thing, like, I get it. Like, this is why I feel this way. But I'm reading this now because my wife has been an absolute trooper, and she's like coming with me around the damn Northeast to try and raise money for prevention, for suicide prevention, and like she helped sell books the other day in Ohio, and it's just I'm very grateful to have her with me here. So this is called For My Wife. There are bright afternoons when I watch her snipping time from the windowsill, quietly singing to herself. And in those moments, I'm certain that if she cracked me open, I'd emit light. This is called Poem for a Sick Child on the 4th of July. Night again, and the two of us rocking, both wanting sleep, while the neighboring farm blows off the last of its mortars, my hands still smelling of hose water and pink brandywine leaves. A small plastic giraffe with big green eyes and a pair of blue overalls, is digging its outstretched arm into my hip from its misplaced home beneath the cushions of our glider. Outside, as the celebration dims, the night resigns itself again to darkness, and your gut-sick body finally slacks into mine. Yes, you love me now. Because when your mother sleeps, I am what's left of what you know. And in tomorrow's tired daylight, I will likely hide this toy giraffe somewhere far from you and this chair that has tonight assumed itself our cradle. For now, though, I'll breathe you in, commit your tiny form to memory, and stay here uncomfortable like this for as long as you will let me, knowing how quickly time takes us away from who we've been. This is called German Chamomile. It's so nice to think of you sitting by an open window, drinking tea and humming something about birds your grandmother taught you as a child. I store these thoughts in small glass jars, bits of dried flowers to steep when I'm lonely. So this next one, I really try not to write a lot of political poems because I don't know. I feel like a lot of other people do it way better than I do. But, like I said, I had a kid. And it's been a weird couple of years to raise a kid, where, like, every time you turn on the news, you have to ask, like, how the fuck am I supposed to explain this to somebody? Companion planting, for anyone that doesn't know, is where you plant things that you don't necessarily think you are going to use, but because they are beneficial to everything. So you're creating, like, a little ecosystem around you. There's probably stuff in this farm right now that isn't necessarily something that Nick wants to use, but he knows that if you let everything grow together, everything benefits from diversity. So this is called companion planting, and it's my reaction to like having to know I'm going to eventually have to describe what the fuck happened to a kid this year and last year. My daughter is learning to recognize herself in mirrors, squealing, "Me!" bouncing red blonde curls, hands clapping in the joy of humid August growth. Today there are Nazis burning torches in Virginia, stretching our seams tight like moth-chewed funeral suits, straining to cover the sad growth of our weak core. I'm trying hard to work on us, and to help her understand how, in our garden out back, that transcendence of volunteers and heirloom grace, the dill and the basil and the marigolds work together like allied troops to keep the threats away, so the yield may be stronger for its dependence on the other. Okay, here's a couple of other new ones. We're going to butt up against one of the other. Part one of this poem is about like that anxiousness that, for at least me, sets in at the end of the year when I realize that like I'm running out of stuff to do outside, which is kind of like what keeps me baseline. So part one of this is the like, oh shit, and part two of this is like later on in the year with like, thank God. So this is called Shallow Breaths and My Dreaming of Spring. November's early darkness and the station wagon full of studwood and sheets of white pine. My chapped hands cracked across the steering wheel, winding toward a bright garage that I call a woodshop and my wife calls a garage. To let the dissonance of saws and compressed air drown out my piercing brain, sick without sunlight, that old loop of panic on reel behind my eyes. Again this year, I will build my way out of this illness, back to my wife and back to my daughter who know only splinters of what I do to myself, so I can fill back into my old clothes, bring the blood back to my face, and let all of this caged light burst back through like a solstice or a muddy April shine. This is called Melatonin Dreams and the Ending of Winter. I am remembering tonight what happiness feels like. Bare feet tracking black mulch across the hardwood foyer, the way little white flowers my wife calls starlight bloom sideways out of the quiet walls of the creek, swaying in the wind above shallow water, crawling over swollen firewood tossed in, those drunken nights warmed then only by the closeness of our bodies and my heart. Slowly regaining itself, pacing with the cadence of the small green frogs, a call bouncing out of the mud, answered somewhere further off into the early darkness of morning. This is called Lemon Bee Balm. It's feeling more important to be alive in places full of bright, growing life. Drilling holes in chunks of wood to make homes for masons, jarring herbs to break winter fevers in small children, and letting panic mix with groundwater to bubble and seep away. Almost done. So this is called Curing. So curing, I've been thinking about this a lot when we wrote Please Plant this book. Curing is how you take things that you want to save for a long time, and through like different methods of preservation, you kind of let them keep. So like when you grow garlic, you cure it so that it'll store better and you can use it like throughout the year. And I remember writing Please Plant this book and thinking like, this is kind of a method of curing. Like I want to take these methods, I want to help people understand how to hold on, just to let themselves weather so that we can make it a little bit further than we thought we could. And so this is a poem about that. It's called Curing. In 2 months' time, the garlic leaves will brown, and we will dig papery bulbs from cedar darkness, twisting them like widow's braids to swing from the attic beam above my dead grandfather's sawhorses. In 2 months' time, my daughter will take wobbly steps, an unripe tomato gripped tight between her chubby fingers toward the Junebug trap we've warned her away from again and again with exaggerated eyebrows, playfully stern. In 2 months' time, I will look behind me, shocked at my distance, eyes to the creek rushing stormwater west, and say something quiet, mostly to myself, about how fast it all goes, or how I'm scared to go to sleep, each new dawn receding so quickly back to sunset.